Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I hope you all enjoyed your coffee break. All right. Daya wachim nagach hudeshana nakoda jemacha chajimetawa Alicia Harris we itancha je makiapi. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and for those who have traveled a long way, we really appreciate you guys joining us here. I have the pleasure this afternoon of introducing this lovely panel, thinking about the role of presentations of Indigenous people from a non-Native perspective, which I'll share more about here in just a moment. But I would first like to say this is going to be a little bit different kind of panel. We have one participant who will be joining us remotely. We have a video that she's going to present her work first. So this will be the first thing, and then we'll move on to the next presentations in person. So thank you for joining us to the panelists. It's been wonderful to meet and visit with you all, and we're really grateful for your presentation here. So this video presentation by Margie Crop-Eared Wolf, who's a member of the Blackfeet Nation and Secwepemc. Margie holds a BFA from the University of Lethbridge and Kainai Studies Certificate from Red Crow Community College. She's an artist, a multidisciplinary artist involved in painting, drawing, printmaking, photography, and installation work. And I'll introduce the other speakers here as well before we start the video. So the other speakers, Cookie Kobolzwang is also a member of the Blackfeet Nation of Montana. She is the chair of the Tribal Relations Committee at Glacier National Park Conservancy, and she'll present about that. And then the final presenter, excuse me, not final, the almost final, Dr. Heather Caverhill. We have an extra edition that's a surprise. Dr. Heather Caverhill is a postdoc researcher at the University of Alberta. She holds a PhD from the University of British Columbia, and she has curated exhibitions at Presentation House Gallery and the Museum of the Plains Indians in Browning, Montana. We've got the Montana girls today, so. And from 2019 to 2020, she was Terra Foundation Pre-Doctoral Fellow at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. We have an additional guest who will be joining us for the Q&A section. She's not going to be presenting, but does have, will be contributing to the conversation today, and that is Erin Framboise, who's also a member of the Blackfeet Nation. She is the Blackfeet Community College Library Director. So she's going to be talking and sharing with us about how some of these inform the community. So really great stuff coming. Just by way of introduction to the subject that we'll be considering today, as I said, Margie will be presenting by video, and then Cookie and then Heather will share their presentations, some of what they've learned working together. They have been working on a project and writing and curating objects that showcase the experiences of the Niitsitapi who posed for German-American artist Winold Reiss. Reiss was a German-born American artist who was based in New York, who visited the Niitsitapi territory numerous times between 1920 and the late 1940s. And you'll see some of his images, but then thinking about the community response to those images is really the kind of meat of what we're going to be hearing today. Many Niitsitapi posed for Reiss And their projects, this project that these presenters will be speaking about, highlight the perspectives of family members and knowledge keepers within the community who know people in the portraits. So these are living people that are relatives that are represented in these works. So without further ado, I think I'm starting the video. How do I start the video? Is it? I don't think it is.
Hang on.
There it is.
There it is.
Okay. I just needed you to stand here with me. Moral support. Thank you.
I'm Margie, crop-eared wolf. My father is the late Jesse Seymour from the Secwepemc Nation, part of the Interior Salish in Kamloops, British Columbia. My mother is Annabelle, crop-eared wolf from Guyana, the Blood tribe, part of Niitsitapi, Blackfoot Confederacy in Alberta. I'm a member of both the Fish Eater and Lone Fighter clan. I'm joining you from my home territory, and in colonial terms of land description, our home territory includes both Canada and the United States, Alberta, Montana, and part of Saskatchewan and Wyoming. This is a map of Blackfoot territory that I was commissioned to create from my friend and colleague Tyler Stewart, curator for the Galt Museum in Lethbridge, Alberta. In my artwork, I'm telling the oral history of Blackfoot territory. In the creation of this artwork, I was able to draw on many resources and past research. My current employment has provided me with a great opportunity, and I'm able to work closely with our Kainai Blood tribe elders who shared traditional knowledge with me during the development and creation of this map. I've included the Blackfoot names of rivers, the 4 key markers stated in the Declaration of Niitsitapi, and land sites that hold powerful significance for the Blackfoot Confederacy. I have purposefully left out markers of the newcomers, so no towns, no cities, no borders, no highways are given acknowledgement in this artwork. Cookie and Heather have traveled a long way to be with you, and today we will share collaborative work with you. Cookie, Heather, and I have spent time visiting with about 30 elders and knowledge keepers who have collaborated with us on an essay that showcases Niitsitapi perspectives on these artworks. Originally, these portraits were created to be used as advertisements to promote the railway tourism to Glacier National Park, Montana, and Bachtumatikimi, Waterton Lake National Park in Alberta, Canada. But for us, the Niitsitapi, we know these portraits because they are of Ganassanonics, our grandparents. They are part of our families, our communities, and they're people we know. When we 3 visited with the portraits and our elders and knowledge keepers, we talked about who they were, what they accomplished, and how they are remembered. It is evident in the portraits of them. The clothes we wear are not just fashionable or functional, but are specific and unique cues of our identity within the community and our belonging to Niitsitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy. I'm sure that neither Reiss nor the railway that commissioned the portraits never fully understood that. They recreated the portraits in a number of different ways over and over again, commodifying them as calendars or playing cards and souvenirs. Collectivity shapes our sense of belonging within the community and also how we establish strong relationships and goodwill with outsiders. This core Blackfoot value of the collective was important to Ganassanonics, our grandparents. My mother, Annabelle crop-eared wolf, has written about collectivity. A quote, Guyana Blood tribe has a strong sense of collectivity based on the realization that all actions, decisions, and events have a potential impact on the people as a whole. Way of life and the land. Our ancestors truly believed in the concept of togetherness, of the collective. We were taught to consider everything we do, We must think before we act. We are tightly bound together. These are the two men in these portraits, Shah both sides and tall man. Shah both sides, who was the head chief and spiritual leader of the Blood tribe from 1913 to 1956. He was taught by his father Krapirbo that it was the duty of a chief to think of the people first and himself last. Spadekwan, tall man, was an esteemed Gana warrior. He lived from 1874 to 1961. Shah both sides had his portrait done many times, wearing items that are specific and unique cues of his identity within Niitsitapi, Blackfoot Confederacy. In all of these portraits, Shah both sides has brought his own attire that belongs specifically to him. He did not wear items that were not his own. Gana Blood tribe elders remember Shah both sides as very intelligent, kind, and measured in his conduct, and they said that the way he presented himself in portraits was purposeful and meaningful. He wears items that communicate his identity, his status, his leadership, and the community that he belongs to. The way that he chose to appear in these portraits wearing quilled buckskin suit, the single horn bonnet headdress, the rawhide rattle he's holding, the yellow and red face paint. He expresses a whole world of Niitsitapi culture, history, and spirituality. The meaning and the iconography of the Blackfoot belongings that he poses with are probably not legible to people outside of the Blackfoot Confederacy, but people in our communities do understand what he's expressing in the portraits, wearing significant clothing that embody our culture and value. Shah both sides had his portrait done many times by many established artists, but in my book, no one greater than Gerald Tailfeathers, who I recognize as the grandfather of Ghanaian art. Gerald Tailfeathers was a child in the 1930s when he created his first portrait of Chief Shah both sides. Tailfeathers created this portrait when he was taking classes at Reiss's summer art school. Reiss operated a summer art school close to Glacier National Park on Amskapi Pikani land. Tailfeathers created many versions of his Chief Shah both sides portrait, wearing feather hairpiece. Chief Shah both sides wore this feather hairpiece in several other portraits as well. In our discussion and visiting with our elders and knowledge keepers, they pointed out that Chief Shah both sides wore it often, which suggests that it represented an important accomplishment or coup related to his leadership. We can see how much that it must have meant to Tailfeathers to have the opportunity to represent Chief Shah both sides, the leader of his community, because he continued to remake versions of this portrait again and again. It must have been an honor for him to be able to represent Chief Shah both sides with that important belonging of the feather hairpiece. Tall Man was an esteemed Gana warrior. Tall Man took the first of many enemy horses when he was only 14. He recorded some of his greatest coups and achievements in war story paintings, which function as celebratory self-portraits. In the center image, Spadekwan's war stories can be seen on the Many Fingers War Lodge. They are painted using the iconography of Niitsitapi pictographic art. Pictographic art is a practice that Niitsitapi artists have sustained, adapted, and innovated for many generations and is still used today. We can see that horses are the main subject of Spadekwan's painting, who was renowned as an expert horseman who took many enemy horses during raids. His stories celebrate his incredible talent of taking enemy horses when he was a young man. I wanted to show these artworks together to demonstrate that self-representation representing Niitsitapi identity and belonging through art. This was not new to any of the Niitsitapi who posed for Reiss. The Niitsitapi have been representing themselves and their communities in art for millennia. War art is an example of Niitsitapi self-representation and self-portraiture. Reiss's portraits were another art form where they could express their achievements, identity, status, and how they belong within our community. Yeah.
Just do the conversion to your PowerPoint. Okay, I think I had it right ready. Yeah. Now what do I do? You can just move the mouse here when you want to go forward, and here if you want to go back.
And then if I want to circle something, just take like this. Does that show?
No, because this is on the other screen, but it's okay. If you want to show something in specific, move the mouse to the right off of the screen,
Okay.
and then you'll see it appear over here.
Sorry.
Oh, it's not appearing over there.
It's okay. I'll just talk to
This
it.
might be a pointer.
Do you have a laser pointer? People don't trust me with those.
Yeah, this is on.
Let's hear from you.
Only at the screen now.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. My legal name is Cheryl Cobell-Zwang, but everyone back home calls me by my nickname Cookie. I am Niitsitapi. I am Mskapi Pikani, an enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation. I was given my Pikani name as a youngster, Nitsibuyaki, only girl, by my paternal great aunt Agnes. I am the youngest of 5 and the only girl in my family. I am very honored to have this name. As Mskapi Pikani people, who we are is defined in so many ways. Excuse me. But what it all comes down to is what we view as our sense of belonging, who or what I belong to or am part of. Pictured here is my family, the one I was born into and the one my husband and I of 42 years created. I belong to them and they to me, and my homeland. As opposed to settler context, the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to it. I am part of many thousands of years of history and ancestors. It doesn't matter where I live or for how long. When I return to our homeland, I am home. I belong there. Being born and growing up on our reservation among our people and family, I was steeped in my community and culture. We pass along our knowledge and history orally, gathering often to share stories and learn the traditions that have sustained our people over millennia. However, I spent most of my adult life living and working away from home, making it harder to participate regularly in that oral tradition. I then supplemented what I knew through research of written materials. Much of this information was written by non-Indian authors, who naturally did so through their own cultural lens and biases. When I compared what I knew to be true, my worldview, with the research I had done, the greater my desire to indigenize what was out for public consumption and expand public perspective. Pictured here is Chief Mountain, a sacred place on our reservation. It sits on the border with Canada and in the forefront, the first free-roaming bison herd in the United States. On the right is the top of Logan Pass in Glacier National Park. Our people call the mountains and the area here the backbone of the world. It has been that forever. The Blackfeet Reservation borders Glacier National Park. All of Glacier is our homeland. In fact, the eastern half of Glacier was carved out of our reservation. To us, however, we remain connected to all ancestral lands. When my husband and I retired and moved back to Montana, this sense of belonging motivated me to give back. I really related to the readings last night and the expectation to give back and to speak up for our own people. I joined the board of Glacier National Park Conservancy, a nonprofit partner to Glacier. And I made sure when I did so, I told them, I'm not a token. I'm here to really try to help you make a difference with my people. So in my role there, I helped the Park Conservancy to fund mutually beneficial projects with the Niitsitapi Pikani. Projects which bring harmony and balance back to our homelands and which reintroduce our language, our culture back into Glacier. I am pictured, oh, did I jump? Why is that not coming up? Okay. I'm sorry. These must have gotten somehow out of order. No, it's my fault. No, I'm okay. All right. I must have gotten this out of order. I hope it doesn't come across that way. Okay. Pictured here is poster art from a 2022 exhibition that I talk about in just a minute. A fellow Conservancy board member, Zach Anderson, is president of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Foundation. They have many original Blackfeet portraits, which were bought or commissioned from German modernist Winold Reiss. We always called him Winold Reiss. But so if I fluctuate between those, it's not disrespectful to him. It's just that's how we typically call him. But I tried to write it in my notes. So they were commissioned from him by Great Northern Railroad, the precursor to BNSF. Many were used by the railroad to create marketing materials like calendars, prints, and playing cards that Margie discussed in her presentation. And it was a campaign called See America First. Its focus was to bring tourists to Glacier by train. Thus, the portraits had a Glacier Park and Niitsitapi Pikani connection. So it was that I had an idea to have the Conservancy partner on an exhibition to bring home some of the original Reiss portraits, several for the first time. I wanted to tell a story different than traditionally told in a Reiss exhibition, a story of the people portrayed in the art. Besides bringing tourists out of the park to the reservation, I wanted to indigenize and expand public understanding of this art to include the Niitsitapi Pikani perspective. The best place to tell that story was at home. I am pictured here with the original portrait of my grandma Wades, as she was always known to our family. It is at the grand opening of the 2022 Connections exhibition. The portrait of Grandma Wades really showcases her beadwork. The designs in her dress grab your attention. Also, she is holding a beaded purse she made in her lap. She was recognized among our people for her beautiful craftsmanship. In the 2022 exhibition, this portrait was shown alongside one of her beaded purses, which we found in the museum's collection. I think these are out of order. Well, I'll make it make sense. Julia taught her crafts to my grandmother, Nora Spanish, and Nora led for many years the Blackfeet Crafts Association, a cooperative of tribal members. They often gathered at the museum to create products for sale. I would sometimes go with her and make gubsi seed necklaces. We'd boil the seeds so they were soft enough to pierce, and I'd string them with beads. I would listen to the elders tell stories. Once I noticed one of the grandmothers strung a navy bead in with her black beads. I mentioned this to Grandma Nora, and she told me something I would never forget. It stuck because she had such intention with her words. My grandmother said, our art reflects the natural world, and we and all things in it are imperfect. Purposely beading an imperfection in our beadwork demonstrates our understanding of the world and our place in it. These slight imperfections connect us and are part of what makes everything unique and beautiful in its own way. A weakness in one is addressed by a strength in another, and there's balance and harmony in that. In the summers, my grandma ran a craft shop on our reservation at the east entrance to Glacier Park. When I was about 10 to 13 years old, I would spend part of the summer working there with her and meeting people from all over the world. It broadened my experience and expanded my world. Those days spent with my grandma, learning to craft with the elders, listening to stories, and working at the shop are some of my best childhood memories. Okay, this did get out of order. My apologies. Okay, so I talked about having this idea to bring our work home. So an idea is a small thing unless it has help to breathe life into it. With Zach's help from the BNSF Foundation, we were able to bring home 8 original portraits of Blackfeet tribal members to our reservation, to our people. This idea was aided by fellow panelist, Dr. Heather Caverhill, who was doing research for her doctoral dissertation of Niitsitapi and international artists who formed an art colony in the 1930s. Heather brought a wealth of knowledge about interaction among these artists at Winold Reiss's art school, which was located on Blackfeet Nation lands. And lastly, fellow tribal member Renee Bear Medicine is the curator of the Museum of the Plains Indian, which is located on our reservation. And she made it all happen. She and Heather searched through the museum's collection for Blackfeet belongings and artistic creations to bring it all to life. And together, they made a small idea so much better. We showcased those belongings next to the portraits. The art of Blackfeet artists who studied with Reiss were also shared, along with stories of how Blackfeet art and artistic elements influenced Reiss's art. Letters back and forth between Reiss and tribal members demonstrated the lifelong relationships that developed, and this approach became the foundation of the exhibition entitled Connections, the Blackfeet and Winold Reiss. Okay, I think I'm back on track. Was that too disjointed? Okay. So my great-grandparents sat for portraits with Reiss and were respectively featured in the railroad calendars in 1944 and 1945. Reiss sometimes asked tribal members to pose in traditional regalia for these portraits. My great-grandparents did this for him. These images show how their portraits were reproduced by the railway company as souvenir calendars and as playing cards. As Margie described, for those of us who know what we are looking at, their regalia becomes a self-portrait, separate from Reiss. Okay, let me see if I get this right. The long dentalia shell earrings that my grandmother wore were made of dentalia shells, and being coastal, they were hard to acquire at that time. The dress contains a triangular lodge design, and above it, the sign, the Sundance symbol, which was her primary belief. And then on the outside flanking the lodge was the crosses. And these donate her secondary belief. I believe she thought there were power in both, and she used those and wanted to express herself in that way. So all the many regalia designs that Julia created tell a story of self for her and her husband. Grandma Waits made all of Grandpa's traditional clothing, excluding those items that it would be customary for him to make for himself. Grandpa Waits was one of the last traditional war chiefs. He was also a leader in the Brave Dog Society. Among other things, this society ensured community safety. It was a natural role to become chief of police for our reservation, serving for 25 years. He deputized Grandma Waits to help him, and she is recognized nationally as the first Indigenous policewoman in the United States. The Museum of the Plains Indian had her police jacket and jailer keys, so we were able to show them in the Connections exhibition. The border of my Grandpa Waits' calendar portrait is most revealing, as it is his artistic creation. It is war art, a pictographic representation of his accomplishments and battles, a self-portrait. He was born on the Reiss River. He went on raids. He took a scalp, captured horses. And then in reservation days, he was a tribal policeman, stopping robberies, and then going to Washington, D.C. to secure electricity for our reservation. He served on our tribal council and was a chairman. And this is his home up near our mountains, our beautiful mountains on our reservation. He signed his border art as a man wading through water. That is his pictographic. The theme of the 2022 Connections exhibition resonated with people and created interest in the foregrounding of Niitsitapi perspectives. Heather, Margie, and I are also currently partnering on a 2025 convening, which Erin Laframboise of the Blackfeet Community College is providing leadership on. So you heard a little bit about Erin. Erin, give a wave. She's going to come up soon. She's sitting up there. And we're planning a 2027 exhibition, publication, and symposium. It remains our intention to deepen public understanding of art production connections connected to interactions among the Niitsitapi Blackfoot peoples and Winold Reiss, bringing Niitsitapi perspectives to the forefront and indigenizing public and artistic understanding. I'm going to turn this over to Heather now. Thank you. I know she'll do better than me.
Oh, come on. Thank you, Cookie. There we go. Margie and Cookie have already described some of the projects that we've been collaborating on. And I've been so fortunate to be able to work with the two of them. I've definitely learned a lot. When I first met them, as Cookie mentioned earlier, I was working on my PhD and researching artists from Niitsitapi communities, from other parts of North America and from Europe, who were involved in a summer art colony that gathered in the 1930s on Amskapi Pikani's land. So these images here, they show two artworks that I encountered when I was just starting archival research for the project. And I wanted to revisit them for this panel today because I think that they embody some of the ideas around Niitsitapi belonging that Margie and Cookie have so thoughtfully discussed. Also, I wanted to focus on these two works today because Cookie and Margie profoundly impacted how I came to understand them. So on the left, it's your left, yes. On the left, these are a few pages from a booklet of illustrations and texts titled Sample Book of Colorful Indian Designs. And it was created in the mid-1930s by a young Amskapi Pikani artist who signed her name sometimes as Flying Woman and sometimes as Isabel McKay. And then on the right, this is an oil on canvas portrait by Winold Reiss. And the person in the portrait is May Weaselfat, also known as Aki Stixanaki or Many Snake Woman. And she's a member of the Kainai. She worked for Reiss as a model in the 1930s. She was among the many Niitsitapi individuals that Reiss hired to pose for him. So when I first came across these works early in my research, I had read some primary sources from the 1930s that mentioned this art colony based near Glacier Park, Montana. So curious, I began to look for more accounts of this art colony and for artworks connected to it. So I eventually learned that the artist who created this booklet and the person who modeled for this portrait were both part of this art scene. When Cookie and Margie and I started to seriously study these works, we found that they offer important insights into the nature of the art community that developed in the 1930s. And we also noticed that what we were learning about the circumstances around the creation of these works really challenged the accounts that were presented in archival notes and in primary sources written by non-Niitsitapi observers. So for example, a few newspaper articles from the 1930s claim that Reiss was at the center of this art community and that it revolved around his school. But of course, the art community that these works emerged from in the 1930s is part of a long and rich history of art production and exchange in Niitsitapi territory. And Reiss and the other visiting artists entered into this Niitsitapi art world in the 1930s. So these photographs from the 1930s show activities on the north shore of St. Mary Lake on Amskapi Pikani's land. Looking at these images together, you can kind of get a sense of why at that time some people referred to this milieu as an art colony. So here on the top left, this photograph was taken inside Reiss's school, which he operated for a few summers. Many Niitsitapi were involved in Reiss's school. Some took art classes, so they were art students, while others worked as models for the life drawing sessions. And in this photograph, sorry, it's a little bit small, but among the group are Kainai artist Gerald Tailfeathers, who Margie mentioned in her presentation, and Amskapi Pikani artist Victor Peppian, who John Peppian isn't here today, but he is his great uncle. So he was also a student. And then also Kainai leader Shot Both Sides is modeling for the group. And if you look really closely, he's near the back of the group. The image at the bottom in the center shows a cluster of resort buildings by the lake. Reiss used one of these buildings as a school, and the people who took classes and those who worked at the school stayed in the nearby cabins or the campground at the site. Niitsitapi artists had been selling their artworks to tourists in and around the parks for decades. But in the 1930s, this particular spot became an ideal place to interact with patrons. When the Park Service completed construction on a road from St. Mary into the park, Niitsitapi artists set up teepees along the road to display and sell their works and attract automobile travelers. Also, the Blackfeet Cooperative Association, which Cookie shared her memories of earlier, they opened a seasonal store at this location as well. So as Cookie mentioned, she grew up working in this store with her grandmother, Nora Spanish. So also, as she mentioned, the Cooperative Association was a network of Amskapi Pikani art cooperatives, mostly comprised of women, and her grandmother, Nora Spanish, was one of the leaders of the co-ops, and she ran their stores. So between the Niitsitapi artists and cooperatives making and displaying art, Reiss's school, the campsite, and tourists passing through, there was a vibrant social life near the lakeshore during the summers. And in the 1930s, some onlookers referred to this lively intercultural atmosphere as an art colony. One author described it as a kind of Rocky Mountain bohemia, with artists and models working in the studio through the day and socializing around the campfire at night. Flying Woman, or Isabel McKay's illustrations and written notes in her design booklet describe the production of the Blackfeet Cooperative Association. So the cooperatives were very active in the 1930s, and they continued to be until the 1990s. The design booklet is fantastic because it describes how the cooperatives were really working hard collectively to expand the market for Niitsitapi art at this time. The booklet includes detailed descriptions of some of the artworks that the co-op sold locally, and also to retailers outside of Niitsitapi territory. So on the top left, for instance, This is one of the beadwork designs that they applied to their very popular line of hide jackets. Just an aside, one of their retailers at that time was Abercrombie and Fitch, which still exists today, but in the 1930s, it had a bit of a different vibe. And the photograph at center shows members of the co-ops posing in those jackets. In the booklet, there's a written description of how they collectively produce these garments by dividing up sections of beadwork among the members of the co-ops, so dividing the labor among them. And also the booklet describes just how important the cooperatives' art production and economic growth was for the community at that time in the 1930s. So the design booklet is part of an archival collection of papers related to a person who is not Niitsitapi. The booklet is kind of hidden in those papers. It's not identified as art specifically in the collection finding aid. So you really wouldn't expect to find something, well, I wouldn't expect to find something like this in a collection of personal papers, but that's where the booklet has been for a few decades at least. And Margie, our collaborator, she was very excited to engage with this booklet, and she used it as a source for her learning and for her art practice. So these two artworks in the center and on the right, these are from Margie's Bingo Card Blackfoot Design series, where she doesn't recreate precisely, but she draws from geometric designs that she finds in the works of past and present Niitsitapi artists. So she illustrates these designs on used bingo cards that she collects from her friends and family. She's studied many past and contemporary artists while making the series. This booklet from the 1930s is one of her resources. So these two works draw specifically from Flying Woman's booklet. I think the importance of this booklet as a Niitsitapi belonging that can be and is being reclaimed really comes to life in Margie's series. Her work demonstrates that the cooperatives were not just creating economic benefits, but they were sustaining these important art practices and designs that have continued for many generations. And with these works, Margie celebrates and shows gratitude for those women who maintain these art forms and their meanings through the crises of the 19th and 20th centuries and the violent assimilation initiatives of settler colonial governments in Canada and the US. So here are a couple of other works from the series. It's such a striking series and a lovely dedication to those who came before and those who cared for these art forms and knowledges. So when she completes one of these artworks, she frames it and she gifts it to a loved one, and she only keeps a digital copy of it. Isabel McKay, or Flying Woman, was contributing to the Cooperative Association in the mid-1930s when she created the booklet. And at the same time, she was taking art classes at the Winold Reiss Art School. So she's among the many Niitsitapi artists who are involved in cooperatives and also taking classes with Reiss or working as models at his school in the 1930s. And then, as I mentioned, May Weaselfat on the right, she worked as a model at this time. And when Margie, Cookie, and I started to study this portrait, we found that, like the booklet, it also provides a glimpse into this period and the Niitsitapi art production that was growing and flourishing, due in no small part to the activities of Niitsitapi cooperatives. So we were delighted to find this photograph from the 1930s of Cookie's grandmother, Nora, Spanish, wearing the same dress that May Weaselfat wore when she posed for this portrait. When the photograph was taken, Cookie's grandmother was leading the Art Cooperatives Association. And she did so for many following decades. So this is a good example of how personal stories can really decenter Reiss and bring forth the Niitsitapi experiences. And what we were really interested in about May Wieselfat's portrait was tracing connections to the person that's depicted, and also to this beautiful work of art that she's wearing. And Cookie was able to not only identify the dress represented in the portrait as a Niitsitapi belonging, but even closer, it was a family belonging. So this was a dress that Cookie's great-grandmother, Julia Wades in the Water, created. And we learned that May Wieselfat is a cousin, and when she came from her home at Kainai Nation to work at the school, she stayed with her family, and she was able to wear one of Julia's exquisite dresses, and she was proud to wear that. I wanted to end with May because she is likely the only person that still remembers firsthand this art community that flourished in the 1930s, or the Niitsitapi art world that Reiss and his short-lived art school were part of for a few summers. May recently recently had her 105th birthday, and Cookie, Margie, and I were so fortunate that May and her daughter Mary shared stories with us about her experiences at this time. Her grandson is the Kainai artist Terrence Houle, and in 2008, Terrence, May, and other members of their family collaborated on an artwork that responds to her experiences working as a portrait model, and also to the experience of having representations of herself out there, circulating in the world. So for this piece called Aki Stixanaki, Many Snake Women, The Daughters After Me, Houle projected a 40-minute video loop against a black backdrop in the gallery. On the adjacent wall, he hung an original pastel portrait of his grandmother by Reiss. And in the video projection, Houle helps his grandmother, his mother, his sister, and his daughter recreate the portrait. So when you watch this, the camera rolls continuously and you see them sort of taking turns inhabiting the scene. And from behind the camera, you can hear Terrence talking and laughing with his family. And they in turn share stories, including May's recollections of that time. So, and another lovely thing about the video was that it was recorded in Terrence's mother's kitchen. So the bustle of the house and the voices of the family provide this ambient background noise. So Terrence has described this work as a reclamation of his grandmother's portrait. And we let him know that we were taking part in this symposium on the theme of belonging. And he sent us a quote that would be really nice to end with. He said, "This project was a way for us to bring that portrait back to us, to our family memory, and to our grandmother's story. It was like bringing her back home to where she belongs." Thank you. Just leave it. Okay. Don't let me forget it. I know I put mine down. I made a big mess anyway, so. Where's here? Walking up the stairs. That's okay. Yes. Oh.
Actually, I'll have her get that one. That's okay. We'll share this. Great.
Oki, Nistu, Nadanaku, Erin LaFramboise. I'm Scott Bigani. So I'm Erin LaFramboise. I'm Blackfeet from Montana. As you heard earlier, I'm the library director at Medicine Spring Library, which is the academic library for Blackfeet Community College, the tribal library for the Blackfeet Reservation, and holds the Blackfeet Community Archives. And I told someone earlier, it was you, why I'm here. And I'm actually very happy to have tribal colleges represented in this room, because oftentimes I feel like tribal colleges are thought of as other, as not at the same level. And as, I guess it's probably just a racist way of looking at when Indigenous people teach themselves, it's not as good as when white people teach us. So Cookie has brought me along for the ride. I'm very active in the community and engaging with art, all types of art. I love to learn how to do new things, and I love to teach people how to do the things I've learned how to do. Sometimes I have money to pay people to teach us, sometimes I don't. So I'm the one like figuring everything out. And we've had some great luck of having artists as library employees in the past. So we've had some really amazing connection with art and artists in our community. We have an annual art show that runs from 1 to 2 weeks a year. And that's actually the real way Cookie connected with me. I don't know if it was Renee or if you knew about the art show, but she came and she said, can you postpone your art show to be at the same time as this, as the introduction of this exhibit? So her board for the, that she's on for the Glacier National Park Conservancy was there. And then we also had some of Reiss's family members who were visiting for the opening. They were able to come into the library and see our community art. So from children to older people, students at the college, and then community members who just know that that's a space that they're welcome in. Since that time, Cookie's connected me to 3 people in the room, 4 people total, 3 people in the room. And I've talked about my passion of gathering our knowledge that has been extracted from our community. All of our communities have had that, and still have that, where people come in, want our knowledge, and then take it away for their own gain, rarely bringing it back. And so I've been, I guess, really passionate about this. And so I've had a lot of great success at reconnecting with institutions that hold Niitsitapi and Blackfeet knowledge to bring it back to our community. I'm not one for saying, I want your originals, because I'm not an archivist. I can't handle your originals. We don't have the building, blah, blah, blah. We just need that knowledge back. And I like to tell students, when they're looking at something that we're bringing back, to realize that this has been synthesized and translated several times. So from Blackfeet into English, into the English of the person studying it, because those aren't always the same languages. And then they take it away from the reservation or from wherever they were with us, and then synthesize it in their own brain, in their own community. They write a work and it comes back into our community, and then we have to figure out what's real and what's not. So I think it's a challenge and also really exciting for our community to gather some of this knowledge that's been extracted, and then to also build new knowledge off of that. Remember that, my grandma was telling me about this, and it was nothing like what this guy wrote about, or, something like that. Um, and I feel like it's been, Emily had me come a couple days early and work in the Western History collection. I brought my own scanner, and I scanned about 700 pages. And I definitely didn't get everything that they had that was Blackfeet in their archives, but I've been promised help to get that back to us. So that's really exciting. And I think just in general, a lot of that knowledge was extracted and people left us soon after that. So some of that is really a repatriation of knowledge that we have not lost. It's just not in the foreground of, of our thoughts. So I'm very excited to have this opportunity to meet more people, to be able to travel and help with other, how do we teach this? Annika had me come out to Omaha several years ago. And I think that the library and the archives really is a good cultural space to have that gathering. And that one thing I didn't say at the beginning, I'm the first Blackfeet tribal member to be the head of our library and archives, and that has mattered. Like the community. So the community didn't trust our previous librarian, and I didn't trust her either. So just seeing the difference from when I was a library worker to now the library director, and the trust my community has given, but oftentimes it's because I've trusted them first. That I trust their knowledge and I trust their vision of what they'd like the library to be, and really truly making it a beginning space that is not just a space of knowledge, but a space of culture. So it's kind of off, but yeah, just to explain who I am and why I'm here.
Thank you, Erin, and I appreciate you joining us. One of the things, and it's kind of related to your comment, but this project, I guess these projects, there are multiple projects going on that you're kind of referring to, all centering around this body of imagery. But one of the things that really strikes me about these projects is that they are shifting authority in some way back to Blackfeet people, and sort of making this, reminding us as art historians and as people thinking about like images of the West in whatever way, that the person who has the real interpretable authority on that is the people in the images, right, and their descendants. And Heather, it struck me really interestingly to talk about the sort of long history of exchange that's taking place in this territory, and placing Reiss into a long continuum. And I just wondered if any of you had more to say about that, this sort of long history of exchange. I know, I'm a Assiniboine, so we get things through you all, right? This is the sort of axis of exchange into the plains through that region. And so I know that, but I wonder if any of you had thoughts about kind of thinking about this sort of longer history of exchange and material through that space.
I wish Margie was here, because that's kind of her jam, talking about the continuum. And oh, sorry, I just said I wish Margie was here, because that's something that she's written about and talked about, is the continuum, and how Blackfoot artists have sort of taken different influences and sort of adapted art practices. So I won't talk too much on that, because it would be better to hear it from Margie, but maybe Erin and Cookie have something to say.
If in one of the pictures that Heather shared, it shows the Blackfeet Crafts Association, and it's a log building, if you remember from the slideshow. And that log building, before it became the Blackfeet Crafts Association, was the jail. So my grandmother and or my great grandmother and great grandfather Wades occupied that space. There was a living space in there, and then there was a jail in there. And so sometimes they'd have prisoners in there, or not really prisoners, but they'd have people in there who were, had been out rabble rousing or something. And they made them sleep it off inside that space. So when it became the craft shop and my grandmother Nora was there, they were producing movies, and The Cattle Queen of Montana was filmed up there. I don't know if any of you are old enough to even remember that, but Cattle Queen of Montana had Ronald Reagan in it, and Barbara Stanwyck. And my grandmother always told me that she cussed like a mule skinner, Barbara Stanwyck. And but anyway, just to think about how people came into our territory and onto our lands, and they were treated really well. I mean, everything, is relational based with our people. And so, it was probably some of that relationship that desire to be open and to let people in that caused a lot of the appropriation of our culture or the treatment of our people as less than. But I have a story that I just need to share because it popped into my head. But Ronald Reagan told my grandmother he was going to come over to the craft shop, but he couldn't come over until later in the evening. And they used my grandparents' horses in the filming of that. So they got to know some of the actors. And so anyway, he told her he was going to come over in the evening after they shut down. And my cousin Dolores, who's quite a bit older than me, she was staying there at the place with them then. And so he comes and he knocks on the door, and Dolores goes to the door and she goes, "Who's there?" And he goes, "Ronald Reagan." And she goes, "Oh yeah, Shirley Temple's in here." My grandmother was so mad. She was just like, "What are you doing?" And
if you don't know, there were quite a few Blackfeet in the Shirley Temple movie, Susanna the Mounties. So
yes.
So that's really fun.
Yeah.
The opening scene of The Shining was also filmed in Niitsitapi territory.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So I just wanted to say really quick, a scholar and artist, Gainai, Jared Tailfeathers, just recently wrote a book about cultural spaces, and he came down to the library and gave a talk, and he said, all of the highways in Alberta and Montana, they didn't just come up and say, "Oh, this would be a good way to get through the mountains." No, those were our highways before they put pavement down. And they, the province and the state just decided that was the best way to get around. Obviously, we've been doing it for millennia. So I think that when you think about exchange, sometimes it's hard to see underneath the pavement, what were the routes before the pavement was put on top. And Jared says, once you know what to look for, everywhere in Alberta, you'll find a Blackfeet artifact in the land. So, he was an amazing speaker, and I really wish him luck on his future studies and book writing. So I'm excited for him.
That's incredible. I have another question that I guess maybe it's a two-part question because it's a two-part observation. But one of the things that I find really interesting about these paintings is that they function in sort of two different ways, right? I think you made the comment that these are self-portraits that are separate from Reiss's objectives, right? He was really making these images, but that they are also the individual sitters sort of presenting themselves in a really particular way. And it's striking how accurate they are. They're quite, compelling. Their detail is just incredible. And so I think I'm wondering if the current observers from your community are looking at those and thinking, how they're telling a story about individuals. But then also on the other hand, did they know how they were functioning for tribal members, right? That they were the image that you showed of your grandparents with the empire builder, striking language. And did they know what was going on with those and how they were kind of circulating in sort of popular contexts? And I think that's a question for maybe everybody to think through. I'll hand it to you.
Well, yes, they did. Well, they kind of did, yes. So I think you may be able to talk to like Eileen or maybe, so at that time, it was not long that everything had been denied to us. So we were kept on the reservation, and unlike some of the people that you're hearing from here in Oklahoma, we were not moved. We have a 1.5 million acre reservation that we live on, and like I said, it borders Canada, borders Alberta, and it borders Glacier Park on the east, or on the west. Sorry, on the west, and so I think that when they posed for those portraits, I think Reiss, and I'm visiting, Heather had done so much research and visiting with her. Reiss paid them a fair price. And at the time, for some of them, he hadn't been yet commissioned by Great Northern Railroad to produce them for them as, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, Heather, but he hadn't quite, some of them were commissioned by Great Northern Railroad, but other ones he came out and he just asked them to pose, and then he painted portraits of them on the hopes that he would be able to sell them, yes, but not yet. All of it was in thoughts of the See America First campaign. And so when and they had encampments there, and I mean, it really was propaganda and to get people to come out. But in some respects, like I remember my grandmother telling me about it, that because our culture had been so suppressed, because we weren't allowed to perform some of our ceremony and our dances, they didn't want us to gather, to have it such that it was a commodity. It was something that they wanted us to do, and we could have our teepee encampment up there behind, and up at St. Mary and over by the lodge in East Glacier. It was like it was a nice thing to have our culture valued, to have people want to see it and learn about it and that sort of thing. So there's that aspect of it, but you can't forget about the propaganda part of it.
So, like Cookie's family awaits in the waters, my husband's family, his great grandparents were part of that group of people who went up to the big hotel every summer and lived. They wore their buckskin the whole summer. They lived in teepees. They pitched their lodges. So the first thing you saw when you got off that train was the lodges, and then the big hotel, the big lodge behind it. Very interesting stories I've heard, from my husband's grandpa, who was a teenager at that time. He didn't want to have any part of it. He ran around in his clothes. He found friends at the hotel. We were looking through some pictures and we're like, who are all these white people? And my mother-in-law was like, oh, my dad told a story that one summer he got to be really good friends with these kids, and they were together all summer. So they took a lot of pictures and they gave him a copy, but they wanted to bring him to the swimming pool, and the hotel said no. Indians weren't even really allowed in the hotel. They were only allowed on the lawn. And apparently this family had enough money that the mother said, well, we'll leave. And so they said, okay, you can bring that Indian kid into the pool. So, they were staying up there, and Grandpa Gene talks about, that summer he went and saw Gone with the Wind. So oftentimes in my brain, I fight with myself that, the images we've been fed, that this was a traditional time. Well, no, we were living modern lives, and that's often one of my biggest goals in our community, is to have us start building our modern record, because after the 1940s, nobody cared. Nobody cared about Blackfeet. They wanted our ancient stories. They didn't want us as we are now. So one of my big movements is to, to show that, yes, you're going to see all these pictures and they're all wearing their buckskins, and you're not going to see them really very often with the crowds of white people around them. Wades in the Water's signature is they would give Indian names. So lots of people, oh, I was adopted in the tribe. It's like, okay. And they're like, I got this, it's not even paper. I got this hide that shows that I'm part of the tribe now, because that was one of the gimmicks. They do a naming ceremony, and by the pictographs on these hides, it was a real ceremony, something that if you got a name, you would go through today. But they drew every part of the ceremony. Then on the top, they draw the people who gave the name, and in the middle, they draw the name of the person. And on the bottom, signed in the pictographs, all of the people who were a part of that ceremony. So very interesting, because, a lot of our own people haven't gone through a naming ceremony. So it's very interesting to see people like coming back saying, I've been a part of the tribe, or my grandparents were, adopted into the tribe. What does that mean? As we're still trying to reclaim that in our community for ourselves. So I don't know, that it's a very interesting time to realize that, these portraits are amazing, and the artwork is traditional and it's very detailed, and you see a lot of our artwork now, it's very similar. But at the same time, most of them, when they went home, they put on, their pants and their jackets, and they didn't go home in buckskin. They didn't show up in buckskin. That was all part of the scene, I guess.
Okay, I'll make a comment. Okay. Well, since I was talking about the cooperative association, one thing that I don't know if we've discussed with Aaron, but Cookie and I have discussed is when the cooperative built their store at the new entrance to the park, or the new road into the entrance of the park, that was on Blackfeet land, and they still constructed teepees to encourage people to come off the road, but it was on their own terms. So I read that, one of the teepees was set up like a museum, and they would charge an entry to come in. So it's this way of sort of, taking this commodified kind of context and refashioning it on their own terms. So I think that kind of goes along with that as well.
I was just going to say, I would pose. So the craft shop was there, and I had a beautiful beaded buckskin dress that my grandma let all of us kids wear. As you outgrew it, then the next one we get to put the dress on. And so I was the right size, so I got to wear it those summers that I was there. And so sometimes when it wasn't busy in the craft shop, I'd go sit out front in a little lawn chair, and I'd have a little coffee can, and it would be photos for $1, and they would pay me, get their picture taken with a little Indian girl
Really?
or regalia. And I paid for my school clothes with that.
Wow.
And so, and then I'll tell you one other thing. I talked about, expanding my world. So if you can imagine this happening today, I mean, I just don't think it would ever happen. But when I was 10, and I was up at the craft shop, and this couple came in. They were an older couple, and they were very friendly, and they were from San Francisco, and he was a retired jeweler, and she worked in the shop with him. And they told my grandmother, oh, she's just delightful, and can we take her with us and go through the park, and she can show us around? And my grandma goes, sure. So I got in their car with them, and we went through the park, and I showed them all over, and they bought me lunch. And then in the evening, they bought Grandma and I and Grandpa dinner. And And then I became like their adopted granddaughter, and they sent me birthday cards, and they, until they passed away. I was their little granddaughter. So, but it's just crazy how those kind of relationships were established like that on the fly. I mean, it was just, yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. No, that's incredible.
Generosity.
Yeah.
Generosity of our people to share all of that, and I think that's often the challenge and sometimes anger in the community, because we shared that with other people. We didn't always get to share that with each other. So I sometimes, I'm on both sides. Some days I'm like, man, that's a great story, but man, that sucks. And it was just about 5 to 7 families who went up to the big hotel every summer. So it wasn't like an economic boon for the entire reservation. It was just really for one small community of people.
I think that we're going to open it to questions from the audience now, if there are questions. We're not. Okay. One quick question. Just say it loud.
I can talk loud.
Talk loud.
I can project. My question kind of puts your guys' portraiture and putting it in conversation with the actual people in the portraits as self-portraits and their identity displayed through clothes. It puts it in conversation with Beth Kieto, I believe. She said writing for a native-centered audience, she just doesn't explain the native, is kind of how she writes her pieces. So I was wondering, when you're working with these portraits and understanding the self-portraiture in the clothing, do you feel a responsibility when these are displayed to explain the native to onlookers, or is it just if you know, or is there any type of to explain the self through how they're presenting themselves as opposed to just the guy that was drawing them?
That's a good question. I mean, when I think about the exhibition in 2022 that we did, I don't recall us going to a lot of trouble to explain what we would recognize in the portraits. So, and it was one of the things that I thought was really interesting about the exhibition was how many people on my reservation had never been inside that museum. So that museum is a Department of Interior museum. There's 3 of them in the country. One's in Anadarko, and Heather and I went over to try and see it. It's closed. It looks like there's big construction going on, but we talked to a lady there it's by the church and St. Paul's Mission, and she was like, yeah, it's really not construction going on, or if it is, she said it's been going on a long time because it hasn't been open. And so there's that museum there, and there's a museum in Rapid City, and then there's the one in Browning. And so it that Aaron Space, the Blackfeet Community College, that's where community goes and gathers. The Museum of the Plains Indian, until recently, now we've got a Blackfeet curator there, and we've had curators before. It's not that we haven't had Blackfeet curators there, but I think that there was some attention drawn from the 2022 exhibition. People came there and saw what disrepair it was in, including people from the Glacier Conservancy who, have political connections, and they were writing to DC and saying, why aren't you guys investing some money in here? And so, they've had some updates, small though they may be, they've gotten some. So yeah, but I don't think that we went to a lot of trouble to try and explain that to our own people.
Oh, I was just going to say really quick. Explanation often comes in stories. So it's not like, oh, Erin, look at this design on my grandma's dress, and I think it was Cookie, and it was really a small story. And the fact that the actual piece of clothing was also in the exhibition was Turtle. And the story was just in the Reiss portrait, you can't really tell how big of a guy he was. But in the exhibition, they had the shirt he was wearing in the portrait. He was an enormous guy, like, what did you say, like 400 pounds? And he was super tall. His black feet were all super tall, but he was a really tall man. And getting to see that piece of clothing gave us his story way more than if, someone would have just explained it on the canvas. So I think for our community, it's the stories that are more important than the details, if that makes sense.
Sorry, we have to wrap up anyway. I was just going to mention, in Margie's presentation, she talked about an essay that we all worked on, and we did. So many people shared. They identified things and talked amongst themselves and with us about what is being represented in the portrait. So I think probably one-to-one, yes, of course, there would be that sharing, but I don't think we've, apart from that essay, and I think when we work on our next exhibition, that's one of the things we want to generate content at the Blackfoot Community College with members, and then across the border through Blood Tribe. And so people that want to volunteer those stories will definitely want to include them in the exhibition, however it pans out.
It's going to be really good.
Well, thank you all very much. I really appreciate the time. And yeah, please join me in thanking these.
You can sit right there for 1 second. I'll just give everyone directions for our next stop. Thank you all so much. My brain is swimming and my heart is singing with all of these stories. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for the conversations. We will now migrate over to the Zarrow Hall of Social Work for one last exciting event to cap off our symposium. We will have a reception starting at 5:30 with dinner. Everyone's welcome. There's going to be plenty of food, even if you didn't register. Please join us. And then at 6:30, Angeline Bouley will be giving a lecture and a book signing. So please do stick around. And just for those of you who may not know, the Zarrow Hall of Social Work or School of Social Work is if you go back out of the front of the museum and you turn left, you walk down Elm Street, and it's on the opposite side of the street, but it's maybe 7-minute walk from here. And so enjoy some fresh air, and we will see you over there. Thank you again so much for being with us today.